This now brings us to our first keynote speaker. You've had a bit of a snapshot of our keynote speaker, so I think you're sort of prepared for what we're in for here, and I think it'll be quite an exciting presentation. So I'd like to introduce Brad Twynham. Brad is a global speaker in resilience, innovation and leadership. He's also a senior lecturer and an entrepreneur in residence at Western Sydney University. Brad's speech today is actually sponsored by Thomson Cooper Lawyers, and I just wanted to pass on our thanks to them for their ongoing support of Unimutual's conference. Today, Brad will take us beyond the hype of AI into three exponential shifts redefining the higher education and research sector in 2026 and beyond. Brad is a proud Aboriginal man of Gadigal descent, which we're aware of, and he has a global consulting practice in the areas of leadership, technology, innovation, and operates at the intersection of where humanity meets technology, which I think is a very interesting way to explain that intersect. He's a co-founder of three high-growth international technology startups. He's guided C-level executives through significant business transformation programs, and in some of the biggest corporations in the world. And some of these include UBS, Visa, Swisscom, and CBA. And he's been involved in significant AI projects around the world since 2010. Brad's radical leadership programs, and I like the use of the radical leadership, are being adopted by organisations such as Queensland Health, Rio Tinto, Endeavour Group, Minter Ellison, and the Australian National Science and Technology Organisation, which is we probably know as ANSTO. He's also mentors a number of high-profile technology founders in Silicon Valley. In his spare time, and I think you'll find this quite interesting, he's raising 3 future Jedi Knights. I'll let Brad explain that when he gets up, on the central coast of New South Wales. So please welcome Brad to the stage.
Well, good morning again. Bit quieter this time. Good morning again. That's better. We are still there. Anyone here got young kids? Primary age, had primary age kids? You know how they use the Force? Dad, can you bring me some Nutella toast? And then magically it appears in front of them. That's how you raise Jedi Knights right there, just saying. Now, by now, you've probably realised that I have quite a bit of a hybrid operating system. You know, I have 60,000-year-old cultural software installed on some surprisingly white hardware. Thank you, Dad. But in my culture, I'm known as a ceremonial man. Now, that's not a hierarchical title. It doesn't make me a good man, and it certainly doesn't make me an important man. All it means is that I've gone through several layers of ancient ceremony, and it's my obligation and responsibility to pass those teachings and that law on to future generations. Now, the other part of my hybrid operating system is I've been on the cutting edge of enterprise technology for over 20 years, and I've been playing and experimenting with AI systems for roughly about that period of time. Yep, you heard that correctly. AI systems for 20 years. It's not new, believe it or not, yeah? And so I've been speaking at conferences like this for a long, long time. And I want to share with you some thoughts today as to how those two worlds that I've just described have come together. And it's quite an interesting way how it has come together. You know, for about 10 years now, I've been deeply exploring a particular question because I've been seeing this happen and coming to an inflection point that we are all at this particular point in time. And I feel there's a conversation or a tension that exists pretty much in every room I've walked into, at least for the last 3 or 4 years. And I can feel that same tension here. You know, as I was walking around the networking hall last night, having a few chats to people, that same tension, that same underlying conversation existed. And the conversation is that when intelligence becomes infrastructure, what becomes the role of human leadership? I think it's a really interesting question. And I'm sure it's a question that many of you, if not all of you, have probably been asking as you've seen AI become more pervasive within our workplaces and certainly within our learning institutions. Now, as I said, I've been doing this for a long time. I've you know, for the last 10 years, every week I've been in rooms like this one. And invariably, as I sit in rooms full of leaders, I hear the same conversation over and over and over again. And the biggest problem we're facing today is change. And I don't necessarily believe that's the whole problem. I think it's very layered. I actually think the bigger problem that we're all facing today is that the external world is now changing at a pace in which our internal mental models can no longer keep pace with. And that is the bigger problem. You see, because when the world out there changes faster than we can comprehend in here, then our dads start to show up. Now, don't get me wrong. My dad, he's a wonderful man. He's a, 84-year-old man, first-generation English migrant, thus the pale operating system, right? But when the world out there doesn't look like my dad believes it should in here, then one of three things happen, if not all three, at the same time. He becomes defensive, apathetic, and dismissive. And that is a very human thing to become when an idea is presented to us that doesn't gel with our belief system and how we think the world should look. And when we have difficult conversations, and we are going to have a little bit of a difficult conversation today, I'm not going to hold back and apologize for that, that's my job. Dad will show up. Your dad will show up. So here's my question for you and my invitation. I'd like to invite you that at any point today during this presentation, in fact, during the whole conference, if you notice that your dad has shown up, meaning that you are becoming defensive, you're becoming dismissive, or you're becoming a little bit apathetic, just invite your dad to leave the room. You can always pick him up afterwards. He'll still be out there. Just so you can be present, because you never know. One of these challenging ideas might actually cause the breakthrough that you're looking for. Can we all do that? We all willing to do that? I can see some nods. I would have liked a bit more of a, hell yeah, that would have been good. But a slight nod is good enough. Now, normally when we start a conference like this, you'd expect me to start with some kind of chart or financial projection or some kind of system that I'd put up on a slide. And I'm not going to do that. I think you've got a couple of days for all of the charts, all of the financial projections and systems, and you'll probably come out of this tomorrow going, I don't want to see another chart for at least another week, yeah? I'm going to start with something a little bit different. I'm going to start with a song, an ancient song. And I'm going to play this song on what we call the waddy waddies or clapsticks. Now, this song is a song from my people, the Wananjani people, the saltwater people, that have inhabited the area between Sydney and Newcastle for tens of thousands of years. Now, I don't need you to do anything. Just need you to sit back and allow this beautiful sound to wash over you. Allah Balibungai, Allah Balibungai, Allah Balibungai, Nangankuru, Bamonie, Burabuyong, Allah Wananjani, Allah Wanabain, Allah Wallambai, Nangankuru, Bamonie, Burabuyong. That song, carried by the sound of those clapsticks, is part of a rich tapestry of stories and songlines that have traversed generations for millennia. Now, we called them songlines. Now, our ancestors, our old people, surprisingly, they didn't have calculators. They had these things called songlines. And a songline is a map of an entire system. It maps the animals, the resources, and where the water is. And it even goes beyond that. It maps the relationships between the land, the people, the seasons, and our very survival. And I believe that today, everyone in this room is writing a new songline. Not with ochre and oral traditions, but with algorithms, infrastructure, and capital. And so today, I want to start singing a new songline with you all. And I want to start sharing my thoughts of what happens when intelligence becomes infrastructure. Because when intelligence becomes infrastructure, it doesn't support leadership, it actually redefines it. And that's the conversation, that difficult conversation we need to get our head around. And so I want to encourage you today to come on a bit of a journey. We're going to sing a number of different songs or frames. Yeah, I'm going to give you 4 frames that you can look at this through, 4 different songs that you can look at this through. But let's spend the next hour singing a new songline for leadership in an intelligent age and see where that takes us to. Now, that first song that I want to sing with you, I call Think Exponentially. Now, I haven't always been a keynote speaker. I think in the introduction you would have heard that I've been an enterprise technology entrepreneur for the first 20 years of my career. My last startup I started in 2008, and it was the world's first hybrid cloud management platform. And that journey took me to Austin, Texas. Has anyone here ever been to Austin, Texas? Anyone in the audience? A couple of people up the back. They're a really eclectic place, wouldn't you agree? Yeah. Now, back in 2012, I had 135 developers sitting in Austin, Texas, and it was the wild, wild west of the technology sector. And there's this one place in Austin, Texas called Rudy's Roadside Diner and Barbecue. Now, I know it doesn't look like much, and in fact, it's a petrol station that sells brisket, let's just be honest. But every major technology deal that has ever gone down in Austin, Texas has happened inside Rudy's Roadside Diner and Barbecue. And on this particular day, I'm sitting inside this restaurant on a wooden table. And on one side of the table is my business partner and good friend, Eric Poulier. And on the other side of the table is none other than the billionaire founder of Dell Computers, Michael Dell. Now, needless to say, this was an important meeting. We were there to sign, or almost get ready for signature, a significant partnership agreement. Now, for us, it would have signaled to the market that we were finally growing up. We were no longer a small startup. We were now becoming a mature player in this emerging cloud computing market. And for Dell, it would have signaled to the market that they were leaving behind being a legacy IT provider and becoming an innovative player in the cloud computing space. So needless to say, we had prepared diligently for this meeting, 6 months in the making. We had thought through every possible conception, question, scenario that Michael Dell would have thrown at us. We'd crunched the numbers, we'd done the forecast, I can't count how many people we'd spoken to in Dell. And so Eric's on this side of the table, Michael Dell's on that side of the table, I'm sitting between them, and the only thing going through my head at this particular point is, Brad, don't say something stupid, Brad, don't say something stupid. And so Eric and I are sharing with Michael Dell our forecasts, our projections, the people we spoke to at Dell, and he is absolutely transfixed, hanging off every word that we're saying. And then Michael took over the conversation. He started sharing with us how this was the most exciting thing Dell has done in the last decade and that he was really looking forward to where we could take this. And suddenly it seemed like he stopped mid-sentence. And he picked a napkin up off the table, took a pen out of his jacket pocket, wrote something on the napkin, put that pen back in his pocket, folded the napkin over, pushed it across the table to us and said in his best Texan accent, "Gentlemen, I want to buy your company." Now, you're all in risk and compliance, and I can imagine at this point in time, Dell's risk and compliance people, if they knew what was happening, were doing turns in their graves. But this is one scenario we had not pictured. This does not happen every day. In fact, this happens once in a lifetime. So needless to say, my heart was beating double time. My palms were sweaty. Have you ever been in those meetings where your heart rate goes up and your palms start sweating? No one in this room has ever been one. Come on. Well, Eric, without even letting me look at what's written on the napkin, takes it out of Michael Dell's hand, pushes it back across the table to him, and says in his best Californian accent, "Michael, it's not enough." Have you ever been in a room when someone has said something so incredibly stupid that it just sucks the air out of it? That was this room. Well, Michael Dell stands up. He takes that napkin, puts it in his jacket pocket, reaches out, shakes both of our hands and says, "Gentlemen, thank you very much." And then continued to walk out of the restaurant, never to be seen or heard of again. Oops. That napkin. Oh, that napkin. I obsessed over that napkin for months. What was written on it? Was it a good offer? Or was it a bad offer? And what dawned on me after what I could only describe as many, many months of therapy is that what was written on the napkin didn't matter. You see, Michael Dell didn't buy our company because Eric turned down the offer. Michael Dell didn't buy our company because Eric was a complete moron. No, just kidding. Eric and I are still good friends. But he didn't buy our company because Eric was focused on the transaction. Michael Dell was focused on the systemic transformation. Now, I'm sitting in a room full of very, very clever people this morning. And I've got a question to ask you, and it's an uncomfortable question. If we look at the higher education and research sector over the last couple of years, it's started to go through a pretty significant transformation. And my question for all of you is, are you focused on the transaction, the single data point on a spreadsheet, or are you focused on the systemic transformation? Because I believe if we are truly to transform this sector in magical ways, in ways that we could never conceive, we need to see past the transaction to the transformation. Now, there's a bit of a problem with that, in that I believe most leaders today don't really understand the type of change that they're actually confronting on a daily basis. You see, because traditionally, leaders have dealt with what we call linear change. And we all know what a linear curve looks like. I'm not going to insult your intelligence by describing one. But one of the misconceptions about linear curves is that they're not very disruptive. But if you put enough energy, force, and resource behind something moving on a linear curve, it can be highly disruptive. Just think of a freight train coming towards you at full speed. The good thing about linear change is that you'll be able to see that coming and take evasive action. Now, in 2008, we had the global financial crisis. And as a result, there was a compression of capital and an explosion of innovation. And as a result, leaders were now dealing with a very different type of change that was starting to become predominant. We call it exponential change. Now again, you probably all know what an exponential curve looks like, and it starts off very much like a linear curve, albeit the steps are probably even a little bit smaller. But then you have that hockey stick curve that suddenly rises up. Now in the world of disruptive innovation, we call that part of the hockey stick curve the curve of deception. And that means when a technology goes into that curve of deception, we all go, told ya, it was just hype. And then by the time it comes out of that curve, it's disrupted us all. Now, I want to do a living example of that this morning, and I'd love you to participate in a little exercise. We all be willing to do that? Most of us? For the rest of you? Okay, all right. Well, I'll just assume you will, all right? Now, I've got 4 questions for you. And what I'd like you to do is, if your answer to any of these questions is yes, I would simply like you to stand up. Pretty simple, yeah? Okay, so here's the first question. The first question, if you had played with a large language model or ChatGPT or something like that prior to January of 2023, if you could please stand up for me, prior to January of 2023. There's usually 1 or 2 in the room. 3, okay. What I expected. Now, in technology marketing terms, you would be known as, please stay standing, please stay standing. You would be known as the early adopters. Pretty cool title. Yeah, exciting, I'm an early adopter, woo! Yeah. All right, now between January of 2023 and January of 2024, if you had played with a large language model like ChatGPT or other system, if you could please stand up for me. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Right, so we've gone from 3 people to probably around 50 people, maybe a bit less than that, 30 people. Now between 2024 and 2025, if you could stand up for me. Wow, now we're talking. Now you people would be known as the masses. Not as cool as the early adopters, right? But you're the masses. Now, is there anyone in this room who still has not played with a large language model or ChatGPT? 1 person? I got some bad news. And it's not my words, please don't get angry at me. In technology marketing terms, you'd be known as the dinosaurs. And we know what happened to them. Yeah? Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Please sit down. So we can see the speed that AI came out of that curve of deception. And it was about January of 2023 that ChatGPT started to release its general releases and people started to play with it. And you can see how fast that then took off. And so we can agree that exponential curves are fast, but that's not the danger of them. And I want to give you another example that really highlights that. I want you to picture an outdoor stadium. Now, for those of us who don't have good imaginations, we are in Melbourne. There's the most iconic outdoor stadium in Australia, the Melbourne Cricket Ground. And I want you to imagine you're sitting about halfway up in that stadium. Now, someone I know did a very clever person did a calculation for me. So don't shoot me if you disagree with this calculation. It is not mine. I'm just the messenger, yeah? But this clever person, he said, if I take a raindrop and I doubled the amount of water from that raindrop every second into the center of the MCG. So in the first second, I put 1 drop. In the second second, 2 drops. In the third second, 4 drops, then 8 drops, then 16 drops, then 32, then... Right, you got the hang of this, right? So every second we're doubling the amount of water in the MCG. He calculated that it would take about 23.5 minutes to fill the MCG with water. So we can agree that exponential curves are fast, but that's not the danger. You see, we're sitting halfway up in that stadium, we're watching what's happening down on the field. It takes about 21 minutes for the first 10 rows of those seats to be covered in water. Now, we're sitting halfway up, we're looking down at the carnage that's happening below us, people are dying, they're drowning, didn't say this was going to be a good story with a happy ending. And we're sitting halfway up in that stadium and we're sort of thinking, you know what? Maybe we should make our way to the exit about now. The MCG holds about 110,000 people. 10,000 of them are now swirling in the water below us. Do you think 90,000 of us are going to get out of that stadium in about 2.5 minutes? Not a chance. You see, the danger of exponential change is not that it's fast. The danger of exponential change is that it is backloaded and it's deceptive, which means we don't see it coming before it's disrupted us. We do not live in a linear world anymore. Our world is now exponential in nature. So if we apply linear thinking to the problems we're trying to solve, we're going to run into the same problem as if we're trying to get out of the MCG in 2.5 minutes. At some point, those technologies are going to disrupt us and there's no way we're going to be able to take that evasive action anymore. And this brings me to the second song that I want to sing on this journey along this song line that we're singing this morning. And that's called Sing the Song of Technology. Isn't that poetic? Came up with that myself. Sing the Song of Technology. Now there's 3 exponential shifts that are happening right now that you may or may not be aware of. And I want to cover and summarize 3 of those exponential shifts. The first exponential shift I call agentic agency. Now, we've been obsessed with large language models and chatbots now for about 3 years, but in an exponential world, that technology is already legacy. Middle of last year, agentic AI started to come out of the curve of deception. And we started to see organisations start to scale that technology. Now, you may have heard recently in the press organisations like Atlassian and WiseTech laying off significant staff numbers. And there's been a lot of conjecture around, are they just overinflated or was it AI? Now, I have a bit of an insider to what those organisations have been doing for about 3 years. And they've been playing with agentic agents for about 3 years, and now they're starting to scale them. Now, agentic AI, unlike large language models, you don't put a prompt into and get something back. Agentic agents, they can achieve goals, they have memory, and they can autonomously operate software applications. IDC, one of the biggest research houses in the technology space, came out with a report in November last year that said agentic systems are projected to account for nearly half of all AI spending by 2029. signaling that this year is going to be pivotal in this trend. And from what I've seen in the first 3 months of this year, that's already started to occur. Another organisation that's been playing with agentic agents for around 2.5 years is Goldman Sachs. And Marco Argenti, the CIO of Goldman Sachs, published an article on X in January of this year. And he said in that article that AI models are becoming the operating systems, agents, and economic infrastructure. So to bring that back into something that's more relevant in this room, think autonomous labs and hyper-personalised pedagogies. That's where agentic AI is taking us. Now, Northeastern University have been doing some wonderful experiments with agentic AI, and I know some of you in this room have as well. But they haven't just been using agentic AI to answer student questions. They've been embedding agentic agents into some complex cognitive tasks and administrative tasks and some quality assurance tasks. And they've been heading towards a model of what they call the autonomous university. So imagine this, a series of agentic agents now administering grants, reconciling expenditure against the guidelines, and scheduling complex lab schedules without any human involvement. Now, this shifts the emphasis on leadership. Because if this becomes the infrastructure that we're now managing, the big question starts to become, how do you manage a workforce where half the employees are digital agents? Interesting question. This late, your dad just show up. I can tell by the look in your eyes. And this brings us to the second shift. The second shift I call the liquidity of intellect. And it focuses in and around this area of tokenization. Now, when I say tokenization, most people's minds go straight to Bitcoin. Yeah. But the reality is we can tokenize any asset. Standard Chartered brought out a report in September last year where they predicted that the global market for tokenized assets would be $30.1 trillion by the end of this decade. Now, I've got to admit, when that report came out, I was a little skeptical. My dad showed up a little bit. But just a month and a half ago, I received a call from one of my clients, the second biggest mining company in the world. And they asked me to advise them on a tokenization project they're about to invest billions of dollars in. The asset they were tokenizing, their iron ore reserves. So I had to reevaluate my skepticism just a little bit. Now, for you in this room, tokenization provides a huge opportunity. It can unlock trillions of dollars worth of value, intellectual value, that's currently sitting dormant within your systems and databases. UC Berkeley have been actively doing this. They've created what's called an IP NFT, an intellectual property non-fungible token. And so rather than licensing patents in the traditional old linear model of a one-to-one relationship between who they're licensing that patent for, using an NFT, they've created fractional ownership. So now groups of researchers, startup companies, and other entities, investors, can buy a share in a single patent, freeing up billions of dollars of liquid intellect sitting within those organizations. So tokenization turns your cost center into a liquid asset portfolio. And in a world where government funding continues to decrease, we need to find new ways of funding. And this is an exponential way of doing that, to get a 10x multiplier on the patents that are sitting dormant within your repositories today. And this brings us to the third shift, the frontier. So if agentic agents are the brains and tokenization provides the liquidity, quantum computing provides the engine. And the next shift I call breaking the simulation barrier. Now, traditional computers, the way they work is, if you picture a bunch of doors in front of me now, a traditional computer would open those doors and walk through them one at a time. A quantum computer, on the other hand, would open all those doors at the same time and walk through all those doors simultaneously. It's the best way to describe quantum computing. Now, we often think quantum computing is still science fiction, and certainly it is very, very expensive. But just 2 weeks ago, there was a significant breakthrough in the world of quantum. A quantum research company called Xanadu, in conjunction with the University of Toronto and the National Research Council of Canada, unveiled quantum algorithms for lithium-ion battery simulations. Now, prior to doing this, the research they were undertaking would have been impossible. At the very least, it would have taken many, many years to accomplish. They did those simulations in a matter of hours using a quantum computer. Now again, I can't tell you when quantum computers would be accessible enough for you to have in all of your labs. I suggest it will come out of the curve of deception sometime between now and the end of the decade. That I do know. But here's what I do know. If your researchers aren't quantum ready, they're going to be working with an abacus in the age of calculators when they become accessible. That is an exponential way of thinking rather than a linear way of thinking. Now, while that is still this way off in the future, there is a problem right now with quantum that you all need to be aware of. And I don't know how many of you are. I'm sure there may be some of you, but I'm sure a majority of you in this room probably aren't aware of this phenomenon called harvest now, decrypt later. What that means is that criminal organisations and sovereign states are currently stealing secrets, knowing that sometime in the next 2 to 3 years, they will get access to a quantum computer that will be able to unlock that encryption. Now, this phenomenon has become so pervasive that Thales brought out a report in October last year that said 69% of critical infrastructure organisations, of which you're a part, consider harvest now, decrypt later their primary reason for investing in post-quantum cryptography today. So the question I need to ask everyone in this room today, because you're all in quality, you're all in risk, you're all in assurance, is what's the shelf life of your secrets? If someone stole your intellectual assets today and could decrypt those assets 3 years from now, would it bring down the house? That is an exponential problem. It is not a linear problem. This is the song of technology. Agentic agents, tokenization, and quantum. 3 exponential shifts converging into a single road that I can absolutely promise you is going to have you start thinking about how to defend against that disruption sometime between now and the end of the decade. So what do? Well, we have to radically reinvent our thinking. We have to exponentially rethink what our role is as these technologies come along. And so 3 exponential loops are acting. Don't freak out about that slide, by the way. I'll give it to you a bit later on. There's a lot on there, I know. Don't freak out. It's just showing 3 exponential loops. We have agentic AI that's designing the experiments. We have quantum computers doing the experiments. And we have tokenization making us money from those experiments. 3 exponential loops, unlocking discovery and value within your organizations if they were to be brought together. That is the song of technology. We can no longer think, how is AI disrupting my industry? We can no longer think, how is quantum going to disrupt my industry? We can no longer think, what's the role of tokenization? We need to start thinking, how do I converge those solutions to derive new value, exponential value, 10x increases on the value I currently provide? So the challenge for all of us in this room isn't how do I keep up? The challenge for everyone in this room is that we need to reinvent our infrastructure as a node in a global, autonomous, and liquid network of knowledge. And that is how we need to start reinventing the higher education and research sector, in my opinion. Now, this brings us to our third song. Because if intelligence, which we've just seen, is becoming embedded in the infrastructure, it is becoming the infrastructure, what then becomes of leadership? And I want to spend the rest of the time talking about that with you today. And so the next song we're going to sing, I call Lead with Your Line of Truth. We are at a fascinating inflection point in human history. In 1956, we started to build machines that could solve problems like humans, analyze huge amounts of data, solve abstractions, and do cognitive tasks. We called these machines artificial intelligence. And it actually began over 50 years ago in the summer of 1956. And so the question becomes, if machines handle the analysis, what becomes the role of human leadership? You know, in the industrial age, leadership was all about scale. In the information age, leadership was all about knowledge. In the age of intelligence, leadership must shift to become all about judgment. Because if intelligence becomes infrastructure, judgment becomes our competitive advantage. One of my earliest mentors was a beautiful man by the name of Uncle Bob Randall. He's an Iwakawa man, an elder from Ayers Rock. I had the pleasure of spending many, many months with Uncle Bob. And one day, we were out walking country, and he shared a story. Yidiki was a young boy. And he was out walking country one day, and he came to a tree, and he heard a sound coming from that tree. And so he took out his stone axe and he cut down that branch and he ran back to camp. And he ran back and he's like, Uncle, I found myself a magic stick. And his uncle looked at him and he said, Yidiki, there's no such thing as a magic stick, boy. If you're lying to me, I'm going to take my boomerang and wrap it around your backside so you can't sit down for a month. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we don't do that anymore. That was 1,000 years ago. Well, Yidiki was pretty upset that his uncle didn't trust him. So he picked up his magic stick and he collected all his belongings and he walked about half a day out into the bush to his very special place he went to all the time to sit and think and connect. And he lit his fire and he was sitting there as the sun was going down. And he heard a dingo. And he thought to himself, Earth Mother, Sky Father, if this stick truly is magic, then let me connect to that dingo in ways I've never connected before. And so he stood up and he planted his feet on the earth. He plugged into everything around him through his gut. He brought that magic stick up to his lips and he did what he felt was natural. Sure enough, he connected to that dingo in ways he'd never connected before. Well, Yidiki, he was really excited. He had one of those nights where he's half awake and half asleep. You know those nights you have that are you're half awake and half asleep? Come on, you're all leaders. Surely you've got plenty of those nights. Had one last night, someone just said down here. Well, Yidiki had one of those nights. And as the sun started to rise, again, he heard another sound. He heard a kookaburra. And again, he looked at his magic stick and he thought, Earth Mother, Sky Father, if this stick truly is magic, then let me connect to that kookaburra in ways that I've never connected before. And he stood up and he planted his feet on the earth and he plugged into everything around him with his gut. He brought that magic stick up to his lips and he did what he felt was natural. Sure enough, he connected to that kookaburra in ways he'd never connected before. Well, Yidiki, he was so excited by this point. He put out his fire, he picked up his belongings, and he ran back to camp. And as he came into camp, he was short of breath, and he's like, Uncle, this stick truly is magic. I connected to the dingo. And before he could finish his words, his uncle looked at him and he said, Yidiki, there's no such thing as a magic stick, boy. And he looked up at his uncle and he said, Uncle, there is. And Yidiki's uncle, he looked down at that young boy, shaking and scared. And he said, all right, Yidiki, I tell you what, I'll call everyone over and you show us your magic stick. But I tell you, boy, if you're lying to me, I'm going to send you out in the bush for a month this time, and you know what will happen to you alone in the bush for a month. And so his uncle called over the elders, his cousins, his brothers and sisters, and everyone else. And they're all looking at him like you're looking at me now, which is pretty intimidating, let me tell you. And Yidiki got down on one knee, which is much easier for a 13-year-old boy. And he brought that magic stick up to his lips. And he thought to himself, Earth Mother, Sky Father, if this stick truly is magic, then let me connect to my mob and show them a different way of connecting to everything around them. And he brought that magic stick up to his lips, and he did what came natural. Everyone's lips, their mouths dropped open. They couldn't believe what they'd just heard. Yidiki's uncle went over to Yidiki and he lifted him up by the arm. And he said, I'm sorry, boy, I shouldn't have doubted you. And from that day forward, Yidiki became revered in his community. And his magic stick, they called a Yidiki. You call this a didgeridoo. There's a white man's word for it, created by a French academic in the 80s, believe it or not. Our word for it is Yidiki, named after the boy who followed his line of truth and changed an entire culture. Uncle Bob, after he shared that story, he went on and he said, what Yidiki did wasn't magic. Yidiki plugged into what Uncle Bob called ancestral intelligence. And ancestral intelligence is our human AI system. It understands the songline because it is part of the system. Now, if I'd have stood at a conference like this, even 3 years ago, and said, ladies and gentlemen, today I want to share with you how your ancestral intelligence is going to be the best way to lead and navigate your way through this world of intelligence, I'm pretty sure many of you would have thought very politely to yourselves, well, that's just a little bit woo-woo, isn't it? But science is catching up to what our old people have known for millennia. And that ancestral intuition isn't woo-woo. It's part of a set of sophisticated human capabilities that have been encoded into everyone's DNA in this room and passed down from generation to generation to generation for thousands and thousands of years. And Uncle Bob described a knowledge system called Kanyini. It's a beautiful word, isn't it? Can you all say it with me? 1, 2, 3. Kanyini. No one said it. Can we do it again? 1, 2, 3. Beautiful word. And Kanyini, translated, means the unifying spirit. And that knowledge system says that we don't just have one brain in our body, we actually have 5. 5 intelligent knowledge systems that help us to make sense of the world. We have our foot brain, which is our connection to the earth. We often think in the West that connection begins with our hearts and our heads, but it actually begins with the soles of our feet connected to the earth, our anchor. It's what gives us our sense of safety. We then have our groin brain, our center of drive and creativity. Now, just a quick word to the gentlemen in the room. Please don't go home tonight and tell your partner you've got an intelligent knowledge system in your groin. It will not go down well. We then have our gut brain, our deep knowing, that little voice inside us that can tell the difference between what's right, what's wrong, and what's fair. Then we have our heart brain, and we know that EQ is now the foundation of leadership. And it allows us to understand the connectedness and interconnectedness of everything around us. And then finally, we have our head brain. And the role of our head brain is not to rule over the others. The role of our head brain is to take the connection from our feet, the creativity from our groin, the knowing from our gut, the emotions from our heart, and use all of those knowledge systems to make sense of the world. Now, here's the interesting thing. For tens of thousands of years, we've raised our children from the soles of their feet to the tops of their heads, amplifying each of those knowledge systems as they went through their natural stages of development. And only at the age of 12 and 13 did we start to develop their head brain, their logical brain. It's only been the last few hundred years that we have placed an overemphasis on that brain, the only brain that machines can replace. And ladies and gentlemen, we're living in a world where things are only going to get faster. Right now, we move capital in nanoseconds. Our planning cycles have shrunk from 10 years to less than 3. We're expected to make decisions in minutes that can impact future generations for a long, long time. Our ancestral intelligence, our human AI system, its strength lies where our logic falters. And Kanyini is the ultimate form of systems thinking. It allows us to read the future while remaining grounded in the present. And that is judgment. And so I've developed a new model for leadership that I call leadership after intelligence. And it's another very complex looking slide, but it's very simple. As intelligence becomes a horizontal layer embedded in the infrastructure of our organizations, then leadership, our leadership intelligence becomes judgment. And its focus is on critical thinking, ethical reasoning, foresight, making complex decisions. And then on top of that is another layer of intelligence called custodial intelligence. And this is where we must shift to as leaders. Now, we're a little short on time this morning. I was going to take you through an exercise to look at 3 fundamental leadership shifts. I don't have time to do that this morning. But I would love to leave you with something if you would be willing. So I'll just flick through a couple of slides here. If you'd be willing to scan that, I've written a manifesto called the Leadership After Intelligence Manifesto. When intelligence becomes infrastructure, judgment becomes our competitive advantage. That's yours. You will get that to download. I would love to get some feedback on what you think about this. You're all a room full of very clever people. I believe this is the conversation of our time. I'll give you a minute to do that, and then we'll come back and we'll wrap this up. All right, just in wrapping this up, we started our journey this morning with a song. An ancient song, part of an intricate songline. And we've sung a number of songs this morning. The first song we sung was from linear thinking to exponential thinking. Then we looked at the song of technology. And then we looked at a new song called Follow Your Line of Truth, which is all about shifting leadership from control to judgment. We then looked at 3 exponential loops that can recreate our unlocking discovery and value. Now, if there's one thing and only one thing that you take away from our time here this morning, it's this, that the logic that got us here is not the wisdom that will get us through. You walked in here yesterday or today as administrators, as researchers, and as leaders. I encourage you to walk out of here tomorrow as ancestors, because that is who you are. In the future generations from now are going to judge all of us in this room by a simple question. Did my ancestors follow the napkin, or did they listen to the songline? So lead with your line of truth. Reacquaint yourself with your entire intelligence. Don't just allow this one to dictate where we're going. Lead the way that you want to be remembered. Now, Uncle Bob shared with me that when we finish a difficult conversation, we always want to sing a song into the future. So I want to finish the same way we started. I want to finish with another song. But I love you all if you'd be willing to stand up for me for this one. Everyone stand up for me. Feel your feet connected to the earth. Just do a quick scan through your body. plug into all of those knowledge systems. This clicker's a bit finicky. This song is a song of love, it's a song of connection, and it's a song of prosperity. And I'm singing that into our future, the collective future of the people in this room, the future of the higher education and research sector. Now, I don't want you to just listen to this song with what's between your ears. I want you to feel its energy and feel its spirit. It's my gift to you for this conference. Dangang bi ni an yaraba Noring bai dang bai yaraba Nor ni an yaraba Dangang bi ni an yaraba Noring bai dang bai yaraba Nor ni an yaraba Ni an yaraba Ni an yaraba Anangorowa Nabatiyanu Banji Nurane. I see and hear you. I open my heart to you with love. May you walk lightly on this country, walk with respect, but most of all, ladies and gentlemen, take care of one another, my brothers and sisters. Thank you very much. You've all been absolutely wonderful this morning. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.